The ardent grace hung in the black like a gaudy Christmas ornament left to rot in the attic of space, spinning lazily around the sanctum lumina, looking like a junkyard's idea of a cathedral, loomed around him, all spires and unnecessary ornamentation, like the architects had a thing for compensating. It was orbiting a neutron star, the perfect backdrop for the galaxy's latest diplomatic fiasco. A summit, they'd called it, where cultures meet to exchange ideas and share wisdom. Yeah, right. More like a gathering of the galaxy's most self-righteous idiots, hell-bent on making sure no one else had a good time. Murrin adjusted his diplomatic robe, which felt more like an ill-fitted straitjacket. He hated this getup. Probably as much as he hated the carpet under his feet, a shade of purple so intense it might as well have been punched in the face by royalty. "You look like you're going to a funeral," sneered Grix, his alien counterpart from the Blorg Consortium. Grix had the kind of face that made babies cry and mirrors crack, a squid-like disaster with too many eyes and not enough charm. "If this summit's any indication, I am," Murrin shot back, a forced grin plastered on his face. Who the hell thought a ban on sarcasm would be a good idea? Grix's tentacles twitched in what Murrin assumed was a shrug. "The Coalition believes it will foster better communications. Because nothing says good communication like stripping away the most human means of expression," Murrin replied dryly. "Next, they'll be banning humor. Might not be such a bad idea with some of the jokes you make," Grix retorted. Murrin chuckled, though it was more of a grimace. "Better stick to puns then." They moved down the hallway, a gaudy affair filled with statues of long-dead dignitaries and forgotten heroes. Each one seemed to gaze disapprovingly at Murrin, the human diplomat who'd much rather be anywhere else, maybe sipping moonshine on a backwater moon. "You know," Grix mused, "the Coalition was founded to prevent conflict, but I swear these summits are where they start." "That's politics for you," Murrin replied. "Anyway, explain to me again how I'm supposed to convince my people that sarcasm is a galactic no-no." Grix's eyes, all 12 of them, blinked in sequence. "Well, they did provide a manual," Murrin laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Of course they did. Is it in ancient Blorg? Translated poorly into human English," Grix confirmed. "I think they used a Blorg-to-human dictionary." "Fantastic. At least there'll be something to laugh at." As they reached the summit chamber, Murrin took a deep breath. The room was filled with representatives from various corners of the galaxy, a mishmash of creatures and cultures, all gathered under the pretense of cooperation. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Remember," Grix whispered, "play nice." "Sure," Murrin replied. "I'll be as nice as a diplomat with a gun to his head." The chamber was round, presumably to ensure no one could claim the moral high ground. Murrin found his seat among the other humans, who all wore identical expressions of disbelief. Across from him sat the Coalition, a collection of aliens seemingly chosen for their mutual dislike of sarcasm and anything remotely enjoyable. "Diplomats of the Coalition," began the meeting's chair, an alien that resembled a sentient refrigerator with a penchant for self-importance. "Today marks a new era of understanding and unity." Murrin could feel his eye twitch. Understanding was code for forced compliance, and unity was what the Coalition called it when everyone did what they said. "As we all know," the chair continued, "the use of sarcasm has been identified as a major barrier to effective interspecies dialogue." Murrin leaned over to his fellow human diplomat Juno, who looked about as thrilled as a cat in a bath. "Probably because they can't tell when we're joking and when we're serious." "SHH," Juno said, though her expression conveyed agreement. The chair droned on about mutual respect and shared values, words that fell flatter than a Blorg pancake. Murrin tuned out, imagining what he'd rather be doing, binge-watching terrible human sitcoms maybe, or seeing how long it took to get kicked out of the galaxy's most pompous diplomatic gathering. "Murrin Calidus," the chair called, snapping him back to the present. "Your thoughts on this proposal?" Murrin stood, feeling the weight of the room's gaze. "Well, where do I start?" The idea that sarcasm is a barrier, he paused, looking around, is almost as ridiculous as this summit. There were gasps, offended squawks, and Grix gave a resigned sigh. I mean, Murren continued, we don't ask Blorg to stop secreting mucus every time they laugh, do we? Grix's tentacles flared in agitation. It's a cultural expression. Exactly. Murren shot him a finger gun. Just like sarcasm is for humans. The chair's voice boomed with the authority of someone who'd won their position through a bureaucratic lottery. We must consider the benefits of harmony. Harmony is great, Murren said with a shrug. But forcing everyone to be humorless automatons isn't harmony. It's just depressing. There was a murmur of agreement from some corners, particularly the human delegation, who looked like they'd just been told they couldn't make fun of their bosses anymore. Your protest is noted, the chair said, with all the enthusiasm of a wet sock. But the coalition's decision is final. Murren sat down, feeling the futility of it all pressing down like the disappointing aftermath of a cheap meal. He exchanged glances with Juno, who gave him a small nod of solidarity. The meeting droned on, a symphony of self-congratulation and thinly veiled threats of non-compliance repercussions. Murren zoned in and out, his mind drifting to more rebellious thoughts. The coalition couldn't possibly enforce this, could they? Humans had survived worse. Hell, they'd survived themselves. As the summit wrapped up, the chair made a grand gesture of dismissal, like a priest waving goodbye to the sinners. Murren rose, stretching the kinks from his back. Fancy a drink? He asked Juno as they left the chamber. If you're buying, she replied, her tone as dry as the Martian desert. They headed to the nearest bar, which was about as welcoming as a minefield, but served drinks strong enough to make you forget your own name. Grix trailed behind, still trying to process the concept of human sarcasm. You know, Murren said, downing his shot of something that tasted like engine grease and regret, we could always just ignore the ban. And risk war with the coalition, Grix asked, incredulous. Murren grinned, all teeth and defiance. It's not like they can invade every human colony. Besides, I'd love to see them try to ban sarcasm in a place like Nuva Tierra. Juno laughed, a genuine sound that cut through the bar's dreary atmosphere. Knowing them, they'd try, probably bring a pamphlet. And a poorly translated one at that, Grix added, finally catching on. Murren felt the weight of the summit fading, replaced by a familiar rebellious fire. Here's to sarcasm, he toasted, raising his glass. The last bastion of human dignity. They clinked glasses, the sound echoing like a defiant laugh in the face of the universe's absurdity. As Murren downed his drink, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The coalition might have thought they could stifle sarcasm, but they'd underestimated humanity's knack for finding humor in even the grimmest situations. And if they wanted a war over it, well, Murren thought with a smirk, they'd better come prepared, because humans had been fighting wars of words since the dawn of time, and they weren't about to stop now. So, let me get this straight, Murren said, leaning back in his chair as if it was the last bastion of comfort in the universe. You want us to stop using sarcasm because it hurts your delicate ears. Opposite him sat Etherian Glaxer, a being that looked like someone had taken a jellyfish and welded it to a chandelier. Hovering ominously with an air of superiority, only a being with too many appendages and not enough relatable facial expressions could muster. Glaxer's voice sounded like a dozen violins being played by someone who had never seen a violin in their life. Sarcasm, Glaxer intoned, is a form of communication that has proven detrimental to interspecies relations. Detrimental, or just inconvenient for those who don't get it. Murren shot back, crossing his arms. It's not our fault if some of you lack the skills to tell when we're joking. Glaxer's eyes, all 6 of them, narrowed in what Murren assumed was an attempt at intimidation. The coalition believes that sarcasm undermines sincerity in diplomatic discourse. Ah, sincerity, Murren mused, tapping his fingers on the table. That thing that's as rare in politics as an honest politician. Tell me, Glaxer, Does your species have a word for irony? Glaxer's appendages rippled, creating a delicate chime that was probably meant to be soothing but just set Murren's teeth on edge. Irony is appreciated in our art, not our dialogue. Well, color me surprised, Murren replied, his tone drier than a Martian desert. So you admit to appreciating it, but just not when it makes its way into conversation. Makes perfect sense. Grix, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, interjected with a tentacle raised like a student needing a hall pass. Maybe there's a middle ground here, Murren glanced at Grix. A middle ground. Like maybe only using sarcasm on Thursdays. Glaxer gave a dignified harumph, the kind that suggested he barely tolerated the lower life forms around him. The Coalition's position is non-negotiable. Non-negotiable, Murren scoffed. Funny, that word sounds suspiciously like dictatorial. Across the room, the other human delegates exchange glances, their expressions a mix of boredom and muted frustration, like actors in a play they've rehearsed too many times. Juno raised an eyebrow, silently daring Murren to push harder. Look, Murren said, trying a different tack. Sarcasm is a cultural staple for humans. It's like breathing or drinking coffee until you can see through time. It's integral. The Coalition does not seek to erase human culture, Glaxer responded, with the kind of condescension reserved for explaining basic arithmetic to a toddler, merely to ensure that communications remain clear. Murren leaned forward, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. Clear communication. Right. Because laws imposed by an intergalactic bureaucracy always lead to clarity. Glaxer's appendages twitched, the alien equivalent of drumming fingers. The sarcasm ban is designed to enhance mutual understanding. Enhance, Murren echoed with mock disbelief. By removing the one thing that proves we're actually paying attention and not just nodding along. Grix groaned, a noise that sounded like a deflating balloon. Murren, maybe you should. What, be nice, Murren interrupted. In this place, I'd rather eat a Blorg's idea of a sandwich. For the record, Grix said, our sandwiches are highly regarded within the consortium, and about as appealing to humans as this summit's agenda, Murren quipped. Glaxer's patience seemed to be wearing thinner than the atmosphere on Pluto. Continued defiance will not be tolerated. Defiance, Murren chuckled, delighting in the absurdity. I'm just warming up. As Glaxer and his fellow Coalition members exchanged inscrutable glances, Murren felt the air shift. The room, despite its size, felt claustrophobic with tension, the kind that made you want to break something just to relieve the pressure. Glaxer finally spoke, his voice a weary sigh. Perhaps a demonstration is in order. A demonstration, Murren repeated, intrigued despite himself. What do you have in mind? A sarcasm-free zone. I've heard those places are as lively as a funeral on a Monday. You will spend a day observing Coalition interactions, Glaxer proposed, devoid of sarcasm. You may find it enlightening, or mind-numbing, Murren shot back, unable to resist. But sure, why not? I've always wanted to see what purgatory looks like. Juno leaned over, whispering just loud enough for Murren to catch. Maybe they'll show you what happens when sarcasm is literally beaten out of a diplomat. Now that, Murren said, would be worth the trip. The session concluded with Glaxer and his cohort retreating with the grace of a retreating glacier, slow, inevitable, and slightly menacing. The human delegation, meanwhile, shuffled out like a pack of disgruntled cats, each nursing their grievances. Grix, ever the optimist in a galaxy full of pessimists, joined Murren and Juno in the corridor. That could have gone worse, he offered. Worse, Murren arched a brow. The bar for that is so low you'd need a shovel to find it, Juno nodded. Next time, let's just send a strongly worded letter, maybe in Blorg, Murren suggested. I hear it's a lovely language when you want to sound like you're gargling marbles. Grix resisted the urge to comment, focusing instead on the task ahead. So, you're really going to observe Coalition interactions? Murren sighed, the sound of a man resigned to his fate. Yeah. Apparently it'll be enlightening. Like a brain freeze, Juno added dryly. Murren chuckled, appreciating the gallows humor. Glaxer should be careful what he wishes for. I might just learn something. Is that a threat or a promise? Grix asked, his tentacles quivering in what Murrin hoped was amusement. Both, Murrin said, his grin as sharp as a knife. After all, who am I to deny a cultural exchange? With that, they parted ways, Murrin heading to his quarters to prepare for his day of unenlightened observations. The corridors of the Sanctum Lumina seemed to loom even taller, the shadows deeper, as if mocking the futility of diplomacy in a universe that thrived on chaos. His quarters, much like everything else here, were a study in overcompensation, luxurious but impersonal, like a hotel room designed by someone who had only a vague idea of what comfort meant. Murrin sank into a chair, the cushions yielding beneath him with a sigh. He glanced around, half expecting the walls to start offering life advice. "Well," he said to the empty room, "here's to tomorrow. May it be as enlightening as a Blorg's idea of stand-up comedy." His voice echoed back to him, a solitary reminder that in the vastness of space, sometimes all you had was your own company and a stubborn refusal to be anything other than yourself. The following day dawned with all the enthusiasm of a hungover slug. Murrin dragged himself to the Coalition's chambers, where Glaxer awaited with the air of someone who'd been promised a new exhibit for their personal zoo. "Ah, Murrin Calidus," Glaxer greeted, his voice as welcoming as a tax audit. "Are you ready for your cultural immersion?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Murrin replied, suppressing the urge to add a biting quip about how much he looked forward to the experience. Glaxer motioned towards a sleek, sterile-looking room that gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that screamed no fun allowed. "This is our observation chamber," Glaxer explained, his appendages performing a dance of introduction. "Here, you'll witness firsthand how effective communication can be without sarcasm." Murrin eyed the room like it was a particularly uninteresting museum exhibit. "And by effective, you mean dull, right?" Glaxer ignored the comment with the practiced ease of someone used to dealing with unruly children. "Please, take a seat." Murrin complied, settling into a chair that seemed designed by someone who thought sitting was an art form. Across the room, a series of screens flickered to life, displaying various Coalition members engaged in what appeared to be conversation, though calling it that would have been generous. The first interaction involved two aliens that looked like they were having a staring contest rather than a dialogue. Their conversation was as stilted as a marionette show, each word carefully chosen to avoid any semblance of humor or warmth. "So," Murrin muttered to himself, "this is what passes for high-level communication. No wonder the universe is in such a state." Glaxer, who apparently had exceptional hearing, replied, "You may find it lacks the emotional volatility of human discourse, but it is effective nonetheless." "Yeah," Murrin said, "like trying to start a fire with wet matches." The next interaction was slightly more animated, featuring a trio of aliens discussing trade agreements with the enthusiasm of accountants on sedatives. Murrin stifled a yawn, grateful that he'd at least had the foresight to drink a strong coffee before arriving. "Is something amusing?" Glaxer inquired, his tone suggesting he hoped the answer was no. "Just admiring the efficiency," Murrin replied, his deadpan delivery flawless. "It's like watching paint dry, but without the excitement." Glaxer's appendages twisted in a way that might have been exasperation. "If you cannot appreciate the subtleties, perhaps this experience is wasted on you." "Subtleties," Murrin echoed. "Is that what we're calling mind-numbing boredom these days?" By the time the observation ended, Murrin felt as though he'd been subjected to a particularly grueling endurance test. Glaxer seemed satisfied, though, like a teacher convinced they'd imparted a valuable lesson. "I trust you've learned something from this experience," Glaxer said, a hint of smugness in his voice. Murrin stood, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. "Oh, I've learned plenty." "And what might that be?" Glaxer asked, his interest piqued. Murrin chuckled, the sound sharp and sardonic. "That humans might be the only ones around here who know how to have a good time." "And that sarcasm, my dear Glaxer, is not a barrier, but a bridge." Glaxer's expression remained inscrutable, but Murrin liked to think he'd managed to ruffle at least one of the alien's metaphorical feathers. As he exited the chamber, Murrin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Coalition might believe they could dictate the terms of communication, but Murrin was convinced that humanity's stubborn nature would prevail. After all, sarcasm was in their DNA, and no amount of bureaucratic hand-wringing was going to change that. With a final nod to the bewildered Glaxer, Murrin made his way back to his quarters, contemplating his next move. The universe was vast and uncaring, but Murrin had a feeling that the humans weren't done making their mark, sarcasm and all. Murrin Calidus had always considered himself an aficionado of the finer things in life. A good drink, a clever quip, and the kind of sarcasm that could slice through pretension like a hot knife through butter. Yet here he was, trapped in the pristine corridors of Sanctum Lumina, where even the air smelled like sanctimony. He wandered the halls, pondering the absolute hypocrisy of a universe that insisted on peace but couldn't handle a little verbal jousting. As he passed a series of identical doors, each one probably hiding a diplomat as clueless as the last, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. His instincts were proven right when a shadow detached itself from the wall and fell into step beside him. Startled, Murrin glanced sideways to find a human woman with a confident swagger and a glint in her eye that screamed mischief. Her name was Eco Sion, and by the looks of it, she was about to make his day significantly more interesting. Eco, Murrin acknowledged, trying to sound more nonchalant than surprised. To what do I owe the pleasure? Eco grinned, a smile that could have powered a small moon. Word on the ship is you're not exactly thrilled with the Coalition's no-sarcasm policy. Thrilled is one way of putting it, Murrin replied. I've had more exciting dental appointments. You and me both, Eco said, her tone conspiratorial. Listen, there's a group of us humans, mostly, who've decided we're not going to just roll over and play nice. Murrin's interest was piqued. A resistance, you say? Color me intrigued. Eco leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that barely carried over the hum of the ship. We've set up an underground broadcast. We're planning to air some good old-fashioned satire, Coalition-approved be damned. Airing our dirty laundry for all the universe to see, Murrin asked, feigning shock. Scandalous. Exactly, Eco replied, clearly delighted. We think the galaxy needs a reminder that humans aren't just here to smile and nod politely. Murrin couldn't suppress a grin. Count me in. I've been itching to do something that doesn't involve listening to Glaxer's lectures on interspecies harmony. Eco stopped at a nondescript door, the kind that would make even a secret hideout feel too inconspicuous. She keyed in a code, and the door slid open with a quiet whoosh. Inside, the room was a stark contrast to the sterile halls of the sanctum. It buzzed with energy, filled with humans tinkering with equipment that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and sheer determination. Welcome to the Resistance, Eco announced, gesturing for Murrin to enter. Nice setup, Murrin said, casting an appreciative eye over the makeshift studio. I've seen better, but only in movies, Eco chuckled. We do what we can with what we've got, which, as you can see, isn't much, but it's enough to get our message out. And what exactly is this message? Murrin asked, genuinely curious. Besides the obvious middle finger to the Coalition, of course. Humor can be a powerful tool, Eco said, her expression turning serious. We want to show that sarcasm isn't a barrier to communication, it's a bridge. We're using it to connect, to criticize, to unite. We're reminding everyone that it's okay to be human. Murrin nodded, appreciating the sentiment. And here I thought it was just about pissing off Glaxer. That's a delightful side effect, Eco admitted, her grin returning. But there's more at stake. We want to show that our voice matters, that we won't be silenced. As they spoke, the crew prepared for the next broadcast. Murrin watched, impressed by their dedication. It was a ragtag operation, but it had a heart and humor that the Coalition's sterile diplomacy sorely lacked. So, what's my role in all this? Murrin asked, eager to dive in. Think you can handle a live commentary? Eco suggested. "We could use someone with your particular set of skills." "Snark and sarcasm," Murren quipped. "Consider it handled." Eco led him to a makeshift desk, cluttered with microphones and screens displaying the latest coalition news, each headline more self-righteous than the last. "All right," Eco said, adjusting a mic in front of Murren. "We go live in 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on, and Murren felt a rush of adrenaline, broadcasting to the galaxy about the absurdity of the Coalition's rules. It was the kind of thing he'd dreamed of ever since arriving at Sanctum Lumina. "Greetings, Universe," Murren began, his voice dripping with irreverence. "This is Murren Calidus, reporting live from the heart of bureaucratic insanity. Today's topic: why the Coalition thinks sarcasm is a threat to universal peace. Spoiler alert, it's not." He paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. The room was silent, save for the hum of machinery and the faint sound of suppressed laughter. "Now, you might be wondering," Murren continued, "why sarcasm is public enemy number 1. Well, according to our jellyfish overlords, it's because sarcasm undermines sincerity. Which is funny, considering most of their policies could use a little less sincerity and a little more common sense." The crew in the room was trying hard to keep their amusement quiet, but occasional snickers escaped, fueling Murren's performance. "But fear not," he said, his tone mock-serious. "We humans are nothing if not adaptable. We've survived worse than a sarcasm ban, like reality TV and pineapple on pizza." Eco gave him a thumbs up, signaling that he was nailing it. The broadcast continued, Murren weaving his way through a tapestry of wit and criticism, his words a sharp counterpoint to the Coalition's bland uniformity. As the show wrapped up, Murren felt a sense of exhilaration he hadn't experienced in a while. It was liberating, this act of rebellion, a reminder that even in the most controlled environments there was room for a little chaos. "And that's all for today, folks," Murren concluded, his voice laced with defiance. "Remember, never let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter, because it does." Loud and clear, the red light blinked off and the room erupted in applause. Murren leaned back, basking in the glow of their shared victory. "Not bad for a first-timer," Eco said, clapping him on the back. "Not bad," Murren echoed, pretending to be affronted. "I was spectacular." "That you were," Eco agreed, still smiling. "And just in time for our next broadcast. Word on the ship is our little show's gaining traction. Maybe we'll get lucky and Glaxer will tune in," Murren said, the thought filling him with delight. "I'd pay good money to see his reaction." Eco chuckled. "If he does, you'll be the first to know. But for now, let's keep this under wraps. We've got a lot more sarcasm to spread before this summit's done." Murren nodded, feeling the camaraderie that came with being part of something bigger. The Coalition could try to silence them, but they'd find that humans were nothing if not persistent. And if they had to throw a little sarcasm into the mix, so be it. As he left the hideout, Murren felt a renewed sense of purpose. The universe was vast, filled with beings who thought they knew best, but he'd learned that sometimes the simplest truths were the hardest to accept. Humans were messy, imperfect creatures, but they were also resilient and fiercely independent. And as long as they had voices, they'd make sure they were heard, sarcasm and all. The corridors of Sanctum Lumina seemed less oppressive now, the shadows less daunting. Murren walked with the confidence of someone who knew he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. The next day, Murren found himself back at the Coalition chambers, surrounded by the usual pomp and circumstance. Glaxer's voice droned on about the importance of unity and understanding, but Murren's mind was elsewhere, filled with thoughts of the Resistance and their quiet rebellion. When the meeting finally adjourned, Glaxer approached, his expression unreadable. "I trust your observations have been enlightening, Murren Calidus." Murren met his gaze, an unspoken challenge hanging between them. "Oh, they have," he said, his words layered with meaning. "More than you know." Glaxer's appendages twitched, and Murren thought he might have seen a flicker of suspicion pass through the alien's eyes. But before anything could come of it, Glaxer turned away, leaving Murrin to his thoughts. As he made his way back to his quarters, Murrin couldn't help but smile. The summit might be a farce, but it had given him something unexpected, a purpose, a cause worth fighting for. And while the galaxy might not have understood sarcasm, Murrin was determined to make sure it heard them loud and clear. After all, in the grand theater of diplomacy, what was a little rebellion but a necessary act of defiance? With a final glance at the stars outside his window, Murrin settled in for the night, thoughts of tomorrow's broadcast dancing through his mind. The resistance was growing, their message spreading, and Murrin knew that they were just getting started. In a universe that tried to silence them, the humans would speak louder than ever before, sarcasm their weapon, humor their shield. And they wouldn't stop until the galaxy listened. When the Coalition decided to play hardball, they certainly didn't skimp on spectacle. Murrin stood in the bustling corridor of Sanctum Lumina, which was now a hive of activity, buzzing with the kind of manic energy reserved for impending doom or surprise inspections. The air was heavy with the scent of sterilized fear and the distinct undertone of incense, an odd choice for a space station. But then again, the Coalition always had a flair for the overly dramatic. "Grix, my friend," Murrin called out, spotting his fellow human conspirator pacing nervously near the entrance to the Coalition chambers. "What's the word from our tentacled overlords today? More peace talks about how we should all just hug it out." Grix turned, his face set in a grimace that suggested he'd just swallowed something particularly unpleasant. "Worse," he replied, voice dripping with exasperation. "They've caught wind of our little operation. Rumor has it they're planning a full sweep of the station." Nothing like a good old-fashioned witch hunt to start the day," Murrin quipped, though the humor failed to mask the knot of worry tightening in his gut. "Have they started rounding up the usual suspects yet?" Grix nodded, his eyes darting around. "Yeah, they've already detained a few. It's like they're convinced sarcasm is some sort of contagious disease." "Well, we are infectiously charming," Murrin said, attempting a grin. It faltered under the weight of reality. "Guess it's time we up our game then." With the resistance exposed, the stakes had risen exponentially. It wasn't just about annoying Glaxer anymore. It was about survival and making sure their message wasn't snuffed out like a candle in a vacuum. As they navigated the corridors, avoiding the Coalition patrols that now stalked the pristine halls like overzealous mall cops, Murrin's mind worked overtime. They needed to send out a message, something that couldn't be erased or ignored, a call to arms disguised in humor. "Where's Eco?" Murrin asked, glancing over at Grix. "Last I heard, she was with the tech team trying to figure out how to boost the broadcast signal," Grix replied, squinting down at his communicator. "We need to find her. She'll know what to do next." They weaved through the corridors, carefully sidestepping the uniformed Coalition members who seemed to have multiplied overnight. It was like being trapped in a very dull game of hide and seek, where the stakes were incarceration and nobody was having any fun. They found Eco hunched over a console in a cramped room that smelled like burnt circuitry and desperation. Her hair was tied back, and her face was a mask of concentration, the kind that promised either a breakthrough or a meltdown. "Heard you've been busy," Murrin greeted, leaning against the doorway with the kind of casualness that only someone who had no idea what was going on could muster. Eco looked up, her expression a mix of relief and annoyance. "Busy? That's one way to put it. The Coalition's breathing down our necks, and we need to get our message out before they shut us down completely." "So what's the plan?" Murrin asked, crossing his arms. "Please tell me it involves something more than sitting around and hoping for the best." Eco grinned, the kind of grin that suggested she had something up her sleeve other than just an arm. "We're going to hijack the Coalition's own network, broadcast live from the heart of the cathedral, right under their noses." "Bold move," Grix interjected, eyebrows raised. "You sure about this?" "Well, not really," Eco admitted, shrugging, "but when has certainty ever stopped us?" Murrin couldn't help but chuckle despite the gravity of their situation. "I like it. It's the kind of plan that makes me question our sanity. Perfect. They spent the next few hours in frantic preparation. Every second counted as they pieced together a plan that was equal parts genius and suicidal. The idea was simple: bypass the coalition's security, tap into their broadcast system, and deliver a message that would ripple across the galaxy, a beacon of defiance wrapped in sarcasm. "Are we sure this equipment isn't going to blow up in our faces?" Murren asked, eyeing the jerry-rigged mess of wires and screens that looked more like a death trap than a communication device. "No guarantees," Eco replied, not looking up from her work. "But if I'd wanted guarantees, I would have become an insurance salesman." As Eco worked her magic, Murren took a moment to reflect on the sheer audacity of their little rebellion. Here they were, a group of ordinary humans, challenging the might of the coalition with nothing more than wit and a will to resist. It was dangerous, reckless, and utterly exhilarating. With the equipment finally set up and ready to go, Murren took his place in front of the camera. He adjusted his jacket, took a deep breath, and gave Eco a nod. "All right," Eco said. "We're going live in 3, 2, 1. As the red light blinked on, Murren felt a surge of adrenaline. The hum of the machinery was the only sound in the room, a heartbeat of rebellion that echoed in the silence. "Greetings, Galaxy," Murren began, grinning like a man with nothing left to lose. "This is Murren Calidus, coming to you live from the heart of Arrogance Central. Today, we're discussing why the Coalition's crackdown on sarcasm is as ineffective as a safety manual in a comet storm." He paused, letting his words settle. It was a calculated risk, an act of defiance that could either liberate them or damn them. "Now I know what you're thinking," Murren continued, voice steady. "Why, oh why would we humble humans dare to defy the great and powerful coalition? Well, it's simple. We're stubborn, and we've never been good at listening to authority." The broadcast continued, each word a gauntlet thrown at the feet of their oppressors. Murren spoke with the kind of conviction that was born from desperation, a voice for those who refused to be silenced. As he wrapped up the broadcast, Murren leaned closer to the camera. "Remember, folks, sarcasm isn't just a way of life, it's a survival skill, and as long as we're breathing, we'll keep using it." Loud, clear, and unapologetic, the red light blinked off, and the room erupted in a chorus of relieved laughter and high fives. They'd done it. They'd sent their message, a flare of resistance that would light up the dark. But the victory was short-lived. The door to the room burst open, and in poured a squad of coalition enforcers, their faces set in the kind of grim determination usually reserved for exterminating pests. "Well," Murren said, raising his hands in mock surrender, "guess the secret's out." The enforcers moved in, cuffing them with the efficiency of those who'd done it 1,000 times before. Murren exchanged a glance with Eco, a silent acknowledgement of the risk they'd both known they were taking. As they were led out of the room, the corridors of Sanctum Lumina seemed colder, the shadows longer. But even in defeat, there was a spark of defiance in their eyes. "Any last words before they cart us off to wherever they send sarcastic renegades?" Eco asked, her voice light despite the situation. Murren thought for a moment, then grinned. "Yeah, I've always wanted to say, it's been a pleasure serving with you." They were marched through the station, the coalition enforcers flanking them like a grim honor guard. But despite the seriousness of the situation, Murren couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They might have been captured, but their message was out there, bouncing around the galaxy like a rogue signal that refused to be silenced. In the end, it wasn't about winning. It was about being heard. And as long as there were people willing to listen, their fight would continue. The holding cells were as drab and unwelcoming as one might expect, each one a sterile cube designed to strip away any sense of hope. But as Murren settled onto the hard bench, he found that his spirit remained unbroken. "Hey, Grix," Murren called out, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Yeah," came the reply from a few cells over. "Remind me to never participate in a summit without bringing my own sarcasm-proof vest," Murren quipped, settling back with a sigh. Despite everything, he knew one thing for certain. In a universe intent on silencing them, the humans would keep speaking. And that was a victory in itself. As Murren lay back, staring up at the featureless ceiling, a smirk played across his lips. The galaxy was a vast, indifferent place, but with a little humor and a lot of stubbornness, they'd make sure their voices echoed through it. And somewhere, in the depths of the Coalition's bureaucracy, a jellyfish chandelier named Glaxer was probably having the worst day of his life. The clanking of Murren's boots echoed down the metallic corridor as he was shoved along by the Coalition enforcers. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans, the galaxy's uninvited guests, were now its most entertaining offenders. If only they could see the humor in it. The Coalition preferred their humor like they preferred their food, bland and without any spice of sarcasm. "Nice to see the Coalition's hospitality hasn't improved," Murren quipped, earning him a shove from the lead enforcer, a creature whose face resembled a moldy grapefruit and whose demeanor suggested a missed career in comedy. "Silence, human," it grunted, an impressive feat considering it lacked a mouth as humans understood it. "Oh, come on, you call that an insult?" Murren sighed dramatically. "I've had hangovers that were more intimidating." As the procession continued down the monotonous corridors of Sanctum Lumina, Murren's thoughts drifted to Eco. She was a slippery one, that Eco, which was fortunate because the Coalition had the tenacity of a credit collector from hell. If anyone could squirm out of this mess, it was her. Assuming, of course, she wasn't busy reprogramming the station's coffee machines to brew sarcasm instead of caffeine. Eco was likely off-grid, hopefully putting her considerable talents to use. Whether that was sabotaging Coalition protocols or just finding the perfect hiding spot, he didn't know. He could only trust she was alive and kicking, preferably kicking something that deserved it. "Where exactly are you taking us?" Murren asked, deciding that if he was going to his doom, he might as well be informed. "Not that I don't enjoy a stroll through the galaxy's least scenic detention center. We're taking you to the re-education wing," the enforcer replied with all the warmth of a malfunctioning airlock. "You'll learn to appreciate communication free from your human sarcasm." "Ah, a mind-numbing seminar on politeness," Murren drawled. "Can't wait." Back in the tech room, Eco surveyed the chaos she'd left in her wake. Wires dangled like metallic spaghetti, and the console sparked every few seconds. She took in the scene with a mixture of pride and regret. The broadcast had been a long shot, but it was the kind of gamble you made when the only alternative was a life devoid of sharp wit. Eco moved with purpose, ducking through ventilation shafts and sliding past patrols with the ease of someone who'd long since memorized the station's layout. Her destination was clear, the heart of the station's communication network. If she could plant a seed of chaos in their system, maybe, just maybe, they'd have a chance. A few corridors away, Grix was experiencing the kind of existential crisis that came only when faced with imminent capture. He was trying to look inconspicuous, which was difficult when you were sweating more than a politician in a truth-telling contest. "Keep calm," he muttered to himself, earning a suspicious glance from a passing Coalition member who looked like a sentient cactus. Just a perfectly normal human, definitely not part of any resistance. As Murren was marched into a stark room that could generously be described as minimalist, he was met with the imposing form of Etherian Glaxer, who hovered like an eldritch deity judging a mortal. "Ah, Glaxer," Murren said, adopting the kind of tone one used when addressing an old, irritating friend. "Didn't expect a personal welcome. I assume you're here for my TED talk on the virtues of sarcasm." Glaxer's body pulsed with displeasure, the jellyfish chandelier fusion somehow managing to look both menacing and ridiculous. "Your insolence will not save you, human." "Never said it would," Murren retorted, leaning back in his chair with a casualness that belied the tension in his gut. "But it makes the inevitable more entertaining." The interrogation began with the usual pleasantries, a series of questions designed to break his spirit. Unfortunately for Glaxer, Murren's spirit was like a rubber ball. It only bounced higher with each attempt to crush it. Meanwhile, Eco was knee-deep in wires, the station's mainframe laid out before her like an elaborate puzzle. If she could disable the security systems, maybe she could create a window for escape. She grinned at the thought. Nothing like playing cat and mouse with the galaxy's most humorless bureaucracy. "Okay, Eco," she muttered to herself, fingers flying over the keys. "Let's see if we can't make their day just a little more interesting." Back in the interrogation room, Glaxer was losing patience and color if Murren was reading the creature's pulsating hues correctly. "You refuse to take this seriously," Glaxer said, a statement rather than a question. Murren shrugged. "It's hard to take anything seriously when your interrogator looks like a lava lamp that discovered philosophy." Glaxer's frustration was almost palpable, like the tension before a storm. "Your defiance only prolongs your suffering." "Yeah, well, suffering builds character," Murren replied, crossing his arms. "You should try it sometime." Just then the lights flickered, a subtle indication that somewhere in the station, Eco was working her magic. Murren fought to keep the smirk off his face. If nothing else, the coalition was about to have a very bad day. "What's happening?" Glaxer demanded, their attention diverted by the sudden electrical hiccup. "Oops," Murren said with mock innocence. "Did I say something shocking?" As chaos erupted in the corridors outside, the sound of alarms punctuated by the frantic shouts of coalition enforcers, Murren took the opportunity to appreciate the irony. The coalition, so intent on policing sarcasm, had overlooked the power of good old-fashioned disruption. Meanwhile, Grix had slipped into the fray, his nervous energy now channeled into action. He maneuvered through the chaos, searching for an opportunity to free Murren and the others. The station was a cacophony of klaxons and confusion, and for once it was working in their favor. "Murren, you in here," Grix called as he burst into the interrogation room, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. "About time," Murren exclaimed, standing up with a grin. "Thought they'd gotten you." "Eco's got the whole station in a tizzy," Grix explained, rushing to unlock Murren's restraints. "It's now or never." As they dashed into the corridor, Murren couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline. The odds were long, the danger real, but this was what they did best, turning the coalition's well-ordered world on its head. The two raced through the station, dodging enforcers and making their way to the rendezvous point. Every step was a gamble, every turn a potential trap, but they were driven by the knowledge that somewhere out there, across the stars, their message was spreading. That alone was worth any risk. They found Eco in the heart of the station's chaos, her face illuminated by the glow of her terminal. She looked up as they approached, her expression one of pure determination. "Glad you guys could join the party," she said, her fingers flying over the keys. "I've got most of the security systems offline, but we need to move now." "What's the plan?" Grix asked, glancing nervously at the door. "We get to the escape pods," Eco replied, disconnecting her rig with practiced efficiency. "And then we make like a bad joke and exit the building." Together, they bolted through the station, the alarms blaring like a symphony of impending doom. Enforcers appeared at every corner, but the trio moved with the kind of reckless abandon that comes when you've got nothing left to lose. As they neared the escape pods, Murren couldn't resist a final jab at their captors. "I'd say it's been fun, but I'd be lying." They piled into the pod, Eco taking the controls with a confidence that bordered on insanity. The hatch sealed with a hiss, and they were rocketed out into the void, leaving the chaos of Sanctum Lumina behind. As the station shrank into the distance, a strange sense of calm settled over them. They'd done it. They'd escaped, and their message was out there, bouncing around the ether like a rogue signal in search of a receiver. "So what's next?" Grix asked, breaking the silence. "Next," Murren replied, leaning back in his seat with a grin, "we find a new place to annoy." Eco chuckled, shaking her head. "You know, someday this is going to get us killed." Murren shrugged. "Probably. But until then, we'll give him hell." and with that they were free, at least for the moment. A band of sarcastic rebels forever at odds with a universe that took itself just a little too seriously. But in a galaxy intent on silencing them, they'd found their voice. And as long as they could laugh in the face of danger, they'd never truly be beaten. The escape pod hurtled through space with all the grace of a drunk pigeon, rattling and shaking as if it were trying to mimic the collective nerves of its passengers. Murrin, Eco, and Grix sat in tense silence, the only sound the low hum of the engines and the occasional electronic beep that might have been a warning or simply the pod's way of saying it was still alive. "Well," Eco said finally, breaking the silence, that went smoother than expected, "which is to say, not at all," Murrin chuckled, adjusting his seatbelt. "If by not at all you mean we survived, then sure, smooth as sandpaper." Grix fidgeted, glancing nervously out the viewport as the station shrunk into the void. "I just hope they don't have a fleet on our tail." "The Coalition's not exactly known for letting things slide." "Relax, Grix," Eco said, her fingers dancing over the pod's control panel. "I've scrambled their systems, at least for a little while. We'll be ghosts before they can say sarcasm ban." "Being ghosts sounds nice," Murrin mused. "Less paperwork. But we still need a plan, unless we're planning to drift around space until we find a planet that appreciates bad jokes." Eco nodded, her expression turning serious. "We're heading to Cerberus 9. It's a backwater moon, but it's got a small human settlement. They won't care about the Coalition's ban, and it's the last place they'd expect us to regroup." "Ah, a moon so insignificant it barely qualifies as a rock," Murrin said, leaning back with a smirk. "Just our kind of place." "Better than being re-educated," Grix muttered, his voice tinged with lingering anxiety. "If by re-educated you mean brainwashed, then yeah, anything's better," Eco replied. Even Cerberus 9. The pod continued its journey through the black, the stars slipping by like disinterested observers of their little drama. Murrin watched them, feeling a rare moment of introspection. It was strange how the vastness of space could make even the most pressing problems seem small. Then again, that was probably why space was so popular with existentialists and fugitives alike. "Think the others made it out?" Murrin asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Eco shrugged, not taking her eyes off the controls. "Hard to say. We scattered pretty fast. If they followed the plan, they should be okay. I set up a rendezvous point on Cerberus 9. We'll know soon enough." "And if they didn't follow the plan?" Grix asked, his voice barely hiding the quiver of doubt. "Then they're probably enjoying the Coalition's hospitality," Murrin said, his tone dry as desert sand. "I'm sure the re-education wing has lovely accommodations, straitjackets in every color." Grix grimaced, but Eco chuckled. "Don't worry, Grix. If there's one thing humans are good at, it's wriggling out of tight spots." The pod continued its solitary flight, and soon enough, Cerberus 9 loomed ahead, a dusty speck of hope in the darkness. It wasn't much to look at, a barren landscape of craters and rock. But to Murrin, it looked like salvation with a side of potential insanity, just the way he liked it. They touched down with a jolt that suggested the pod was as eager to land as they were to disembark. The door opened with a hiss, and the trio stepped out into the thin, dry air of Cerberus 9. Dust swirled around their feet as they made their way towards the settlement, a collection of prefab buildings that looked like the architect had been inspired by the concept of barely functional. It wasn't long before they reached the settlement's main hub, a charming establishment that doubled as a bar and community center. The sign above the door read, "The Last Laugh," and Murrin took it as a good omen. Or at least not a terrible one. Inside, the atmosphere was surprisingly lively. Humans of all shapes and sizes gathered around tables, laughing and talking in the universal language of "thank the stars we're still alive." Murrin felt a sense of belonging here, even among strangers. Perhaps it was the shared understanding that life was short, often absurd, and best faced with a drink in hand. Eco led them to a booth in the back, where they settled with the ease of people used to making temporary homes in unlikely places. A server made the rounds, a wiry man with the kind of smile that suggested he'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. "What'll it be?" he asked, eyeing them with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Three of whatever passes for celebratory around here," Murrin said, flashing the man a grin. "We just escaped a coalition detention center, so feel free to make it strong." The server nodded, disappearing into the crowd with a glance over his shoulder that suggested he wasn't entirely sure what to make of them, which suited Murrin just fine. "So what's our next move?" Grix asked once they were alone, his voice low enough to be lost in the ambient chatter. "We wait for the others," Eco said, leaning back in her seat. "If they make it, we'll regroup and figure out how to spread our message further. If not, well, we'll figure something out." Murrin raised an eyebrow. "You mean play it by ear and hope for the best?" "Exactly," Eco replied with a smirk. "It's worked so far, hasn't it?" Their drinks arrived, murky concoctions that smelled vaguely of something fermented. Murrin took a cautious sip, finding it surprisingly palatable. "Not bad," he said, raising his glass. "To surviving against all odds. To making the Coalition's life a living hell," Eco added, clinking her glass against his. "To not getting caught again," Grix finished, a hint of a smile finally appearing on his face. They drank, the liquid burning a welcome path down their throats, and for a moment the weight of their situation lifted. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. As they waited, Murrin's thoughts drifted to the others. The resistance had been small, a ragtag group of humans fed up with the Coalition's self-righteousness and determined to make their voices heard. They'd come together out of necessity, united by a shared belief that humor and defiance were their best weapons. "Think we'll see them again?" Murrin asked, half to himself. "Pretty sure," Eco replied, her confidence as unshakable as ever. "We're like bad pennies. We always turn up." The hours slipped by, the bar filling and emptying as the locals went about their lives. Murrin watched them, feeling a peculiar sense of calm. These people lived on the edge of civilization, far from the Coalition's reach, and they thrived in their own way. It was a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, life found a way to persist. Eventually, a familiar face appeared in the doorway, and Murrin felt a grin spread across his face. It was Tool, one of the Resistance's more eccentric members, recognizable by his wild hair and the perpetual twinkle in his eye. He spotted them immediately, making a beeline for their table. "Murrin, Eco, Grix," Tool greeted, sliding into the booth with all the grace of a man who'd forgotten he had elbows. "Heard you made quite the escape. Coalition's in a tizzy." "That's the idea," Eco said, raising her glass in welcome. "Good to see you, Tool. Any word from the others?" Tool nodded, his expression turning serious. "A few made it. They're laying low for now, but they'll trickle in. Everyone's talking about your message. It's catching on." "Good," Murrin said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "If we can get enough people riled up, maybe we can force the Coalition to reconsider their stance." Tool grinned, sitting back. "You know, for someone who hates the Coalition, you sure do enjoy poking the bear," Murrin shrugged. "Bears need poking now and then, keeps them on their toes." "Well, whatever you're doing, keep at it," Tool said. "People are starting to notice. Maybe not the ones in power, but enough to make a difference." They spent the evening in earnest discussion, tossing around ideas like confetti at a particularly sarcastic parade. It was clear that the Coalition's ban was losing traction, the Resistance's message spreading faster than a rumor at a high school reunion. As the night wore on, more familiar faces appeared, and the booth became a revolving door of laughter, plans, and camaraderie. The Resistance was alive and kicking, a testament to human stubbornness, and the unyielding belief that sometimes the best way to fight injustice was with a well-timed quip. It wasn't long before the settlement felt like a second home, the kind of place where you could let your guard down and remember that you weren't alone in the fight. Murrin found himself optimistic, a rare sensation but not unwelcome. For once, it seemed like they had a chance. In the end, as the bar emptied and the patrons drifted off into the night, Murren sat back, watching his friends and allies planning, scheming, laughing. It was a beautiful chaos, and he realized with a start that this was what they'd been fighting for. A world where they could be themselves, sarcasm and all, without fear of retribution. "Think we'll win?" Grix asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of conversation. Murren considered the question, his gaze drifting to Eco and Tool, their heads bent together in animated discussion. "I think we'll keep trying," he said finally. "And if we don't win, we'll at least make sure they know we were here." Grix nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Good enough for me." And as the night stretched on, the last laugh truly felt like it belonged to them. In a galaxy that often seemed hell-bent on silencing them, they'd found their voice, and they weren't about to let it go without a fight. Murren stared at the ancient comms array, which was about as well-maintained as a teenager's sock drawer. The thing looked ready to collapse under the weight of a strong breeze, let alone broadcast a galaxy-wide message. Which was just as well. If he had to guess, the Coalition never thought anyone on Cerberus 9 would have anything worth saying. "Are you sure this thing won't just catch fire when we press the on button?" Eco asked, fiddling with a bundle of mismatched wires like a cat toying with yarn. "Define sure," Murren replied, poking at the array with a screwdriver. "Though if it does go up in flames, at least the fire will be the most entertaining thing this moon's seen in, ever. That's the spirit," Eco said, her fingers a blur as she connected the final cable. "Okay, we're live. You ready to change the galaxy, one sarcastic remark at a time?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Murren said. "Though I suppose there's a chance the Coalition might just laugh this off." Eco raised an eyebrow. "Oh, come on. They wouldn't know humor if it danced around in a tutu singing show tunes." "True enough." Murren took a deep breath, staring into the tangle of circuits and blinking lights. "All right, here goes nothing, or everything, depending on how well this works." He cleared his throat, then leaned into the microphone with the swagger of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Greetings, Galaxy," he began, his voice echoing through the small room. "It's your friendly neighborhood human with a message brought to you by the fine folks who brought sarcasm to the stars. That's right, we're the ones responsible for turning I Love Your Outfit into a cutting critique, and we're not sorry." Pausing for effect, Murren imagined the Coalition officials squirming in their seats, their orderly world cracking at the seams. It was enough to keep him going. "Now, I know what you're thinking. Why should we listen to another human rant? Good question. Excellent question. Well, allow me to answer with another question. Why listen to the Coalition, who thinks humor is about as dangerous as a plastic spoon? If we keep their ban, we'll be living in a galaxy devoid of wit, irony, and the occasional well-placed eye roll." He glanced at Eco, who nodded, signaling that the stream was holding steady. "For now, anyway." "Here's the thing," Murren continued. "Sarcasm is our way of keeping things real, of reminding those in power that they, and their ridiculous rules, are not above a little mockery. It's a safety valve for the soul, so to speak, and frankly, the galaxy could use a few laughs. I mean, have you seen the uniforms the Coalition wears? They're one bedazzler away from a failed boy band comeback." Eco snorted a laugh. "So, what's next?" Murren asked rhetorically, letting the question hang in the air. "We could all play along with the Coalition's humorless charade, pretend we don't see the hypocrisy, the overreach. But here's a thought. Why not embrace our differences, celebrate them even? Because at the end of the day, a galaxy without sarcasm is like a space station without oxygen, dull, lifeless, and pretty damn inhospitable." He leaned back, aware of the weight that came with every word. The transmission was risky, a gamble of cosmic proportions, but it was also the best shot they had at changing hearts and minds. "So let's lift the ban," he concluded. "Let's give sarcasm the freedom to wander the stars, because if we can't laugh at ourselves, what hope do we have of understanding each other?" With a flick of a switch, the transmission ended, the finality of it echoing in the silent room. Murren and Eco exchanged glances, the kind that said more than words ever could. "You think they heard us?" Eco asked, her voice softer now, a rare moment of uncertainty. Murren shrugged. "If they didn't, they must have turned their hearing aids down to willful ignorance. But if they did, well, then maybe we've just started something." A loud, mechanical groan interrupted their musings, the comms array shuddering with the effort of transmitting their message across the stars. Eco slapped it with a practiced hand, and the lights flickered back to life. "Good enough for me," she said, a lopsided grin on her face. "Now we wait and see if the coalition responds, or if they just send us a fruit basket with a polite request to shut up." Murren chuckled, his mood buoyed by a mix of relief and anticipation. It was a strange sensation, teetering on the brink of what could be a monumental shift or an epic failure. Yet here they were, laughing in the face of uncertainty. They left the comms room, the dusty corridor echoing under their steps. Outside, Cerberus 9 was still the same desolate rock they'd landed on, but now there was a new energy, a charge in the air that seemed to hum with possibility. As they made their way back to the settlement, Murren spotted Grix waiting for them, his expression caught halfway between hope and terror. "Well," he asked, the word tumbling out like he'd been holding his breath. "It's done," Eco replied, her confidence unshakable. "Now we wait for the galaxy to decide if it can handle a little sarcasm." Grix nodded, his relief evident. "I overheard some of the locals talking, words starting to spread. People are listening." "Good," Murren said, clapping Grix on the shoulder. "Let's hope they're ready for what happens next." They returned to the last laugh, where the atmosphere seemed even more charged than before. The patrons spoke in low tones, their curiosity palpable. As Murren and Eco entered, a cheer rose from the crowd, a spontaneous eruption of support that left Murren momentarily speechless. "Looks like you've got fans," Eco said, her grin wide. "Or a mob ready to lynch us if this goes south," Murren replied, though he found himself grinning back. Toole waved them over, his excitement barely contained. "That was one hell of a speech. You think the coalition will actually listen?" "I'm betting they'll at least pretend to," Murren said, sliding into the booth. "Nobody wants to be the party pooper of the universe." They settled in, drinks appearing as if by magic, and the conversation turned to speculation, hopes, and what-ifs. It was the kind of discussion that Murren lived for, the intersection of dreams and reality, where anything seemed possible. As the night wore on, Murren found himself reflecting on their journey, the friends they'd made, the challenges they'd faced, and the belief that had carried them this far. It was the kind of thing that made him feel oddly sentimental, though he'd never admit it out loud. Not without a heavy dose of sarcasm, anyway. Hours later, as the crowd began to thin, Grix leaned across the table, his expression earnest. "What if this doesn't work? What if they just ignore us?" Murren considered this, weighing the question as carefully as he'd weighed the comms array's structural integrity. "Then we keep trying. We keep talking, keep laughing, keep living. Because silence is often the loudest agreement, and I'll be damned if we just roll over." Eco nodded, raising her glass. "Here's to speaking our minds and not shutting up." The glasses clinked, a chorus of defiance that rang true even in the face of uncertainty. It was a reminder that, come what may, they were in this together, and they wouldn't go quietly into the night. As the evening waned, Murren felt a deep sense of contentment, an emotion as rare as a coalition official with a sense of humor. He took a moment to savor it, knowing that the path ahead was as uncertain as ever. But for now, they had each other, and in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. Outside, the stars glittered, indifferent and eternal, the backdrop to their little rebellion. Murren watched them, feeling a sense of peace that he'd long thought beyond his reach. "Think we'll hear from the coalition soon?" Toole asked, breaking the silence. Murren shrugged, his gaze still on the stars. "Maybe, maybe not, but whatever happens, we'll be ready." With that, they lapsed into silence, each lost in their thoughts, yet bound by a shared understanding that went beyond words. It was the kind of moment that made the struggle worthwhile, the knowledge that they'd done all they could and that the galaxy would decide the rest. As the minutes ticked by, Murren couldn't help but smile, an expression tinged with both hope and resignation. Because in the end, they'd taken a stand, and that, in itself, was a victory worth celebrating. And as the stars continued their eternal dance, Murren realized that no matter what happened next, they'd already won something precious: the freedom to be themselves, to laugh in the face of adversity, and to live life on their own terms. The rest, as they say, was just details. Murren Calidus lounged against the cold metal wall of the last laugh, looking quite satisfied with himself, like a cat that had just left a gift on the doormat. The Coalition's sarcasm ban was now just a peculiar footnote in the galaxy's annals, a fact which warmed Murren's sarcastic soul. His eyes scanned the room, filled with humans and a few brave aliens who dared to mingle with mankind's finest. Eco Sion slid into the booth beside him, a glass of something that resembled antifreeze in her hand. "Can't believe it. Coalition's actually on board with sarcasm. What's next? Are they going to start handing out participation medals for interstellar peace meetings?" "Wouldn't that be a sight?" Murren replied, taking a sip of his drink. "But I suppose it was bound to happen. Sarcasm is, after all, humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy, next to fast food and reality TV." Eco chuckled, her grin as sharp as the knife she kept tucked in her boot. "Think they'll ask us to be ambassadors now? Ambassadors of irreverence. Sounds like a job I'd actually enjoy. Besides, who else could explain why nice haircut means what were you thinking and get away with it?" The door to the last laugh swung open and Grix stumbled in, looking like a rodent that had just escaped the trap. His eyes were wide with disbelief, and his voice held a tremor that betrayed his nerves. "It's all over the feeds. The Coalition's announcement is everywhere. They're calling it a cultural understanding breakthrough or some other bureaucratic drivel." Murren smirked. "Ah, the sweet sound of backpedaling. Nothing like watching someone eat their words with a side of humble pie." Grix nodded, his face caught between relief and skepticism. "Some of my friends are getting messages from their families, thanking us for giving them back their voices." "It's strange to think how much a little sarcasm can mean." "Strange and wonderful," Eco agreed, raising her glass in a toast. "Here's to us, the defenders of snark and the champions of irony." The glasses clinked, a sound that was quickly drowned out by the laughter and chatter filling the bar. News of the Coalition's capitulation had spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of camaraderie among the patrons. For once, humanity felt like it had won something more significant than a petty skirmish or a debate over import taxes. As the celebration continued, Murren found himself reflecting on the journey that had led them here. It hadn't been easy, but then, nothing worth doing ever was. He was reminded of the old saying, if at first you don't succeed, redefine success, and redefine they had, with a healthy dose of wit and a dash of gallows humor. Etherian Glaxer, the chandelier-like being who had been their reluctant ally, drifted over, its tendrils glowing softly. "I must admit, human sarcasm is more intricate than I first surmised." Murren grinned, delighted by the alien's begrudging concession. "Happy to enlighten. It's an art form, really, cultivated over generations of passive-aggressive communication." Etherian Glaxer's tentacles twitched with what Murren suspected was amusement. "Indeed, I am curious to see how this cultural exchange will unfold. Hopefully with fewer misunderstandings and more understanding," Eco cut in, ever the optimist when it suited her. The conversation was interrupted by a familiar face, a Coalition enforcer, the moldy grapefruit on stilts that had once escorted Murren to the Sanctum Lumina. It waddled over, looking as dignified as a fruit could manage. "I have been instructed to deliver a message of gratitude from the Coalition. Your efforts have been recognized as pivotal in fostering interspecies dialogue." "Wow," Murren said, unable to suppress his grin. "A thank you note from the Coalition. What's next? A fruit basket?" The enforcer's expression was, as always, unreadable, but Murren liked to think he saw a flicker of exasperation in its eyes. Humor is not universally appreciated, but your point is understood. That's all we were aiming for, Eco replied, clinking her glass against Murren's once more. As the enforcer waddled away, Toole approached, his round face split by a grin that threatened to overshadow his features. Looks like you two have become local heroes. Never thought I'd see the day sarcasm saved the galaxy. Oh, it's not saved yet, Murren corrected, leaning back in his seat. We've just given it a fighting chance. People need to remember how to laugh at themselves. It's the only way to keep from going mad in this vast, indifferent universe. And what about you, Murren? Grix asked, leaning forward with a curiosity that bordered on admiration. What are you going to do now that you've turned the galaxy on its head? Murren considered this, a sly grin playing at his lips. I think I'll keep doing what I've always done, talking too much and making very little sense. Somebody has to keep the coalition on its toes, remind them that their policies aren't as airtight as they think. Eco laughed, shaking her head. Couldn't have said it better myself. There's always going to be something worth poking fun at. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, stories of past exploits, wild dreams for the future, and the occasional debate over whether the coalition was secretly run by a cabal of humorless androids. But beneath the banter, there was a sense of something more profound, a unity forged in the fires of shared adversity and a belief that they could, against all odds, change the status quo. The patrons of the last laugh were an odd bunch, humans, aliens, and everything in between, but they'd found common ground in their willingness to defy the dreary status quo. It was a rare kind of magic, the kind that couldn't be manufactured or enforced by any coalition edict. As the gathering began to disperse, Murren felt a sense of contentment that was as unfamiliar as it was welcome. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, but for the first time in a long while, he faced the future with something resembling hope. Think they'll make sarcasm an official language now? Eco asked as they made their way to the exit, stepping over the occasional sleeping patron. Murren chuckled. One can only dream, but hey, if we can get the coalition to crack a smile, anything's possible. The night air on Cerberus 9 was crisp and cool, a welcome respite from the clamor of the bar. The stars above were the same indifferent pinpoints of light they'd always been, yet tonight they seemed to twinkle with a little extra mischief, as if sharing in the secret joke that only Murren and his companions truly understood. Careful, Murren, Eco warned with a smirk. You keep looking at the stars like that and people might start thinking you're a romantic. Murren shrugged, unrepentant. Maybe I am, in my own twisted way. After all, what's life without a little whimsy? They walked in silence for a while, footsteps echoing in sync, the rhythm a reassuring reminder of their bond. It was the kind of moment that needed no words, an unspoken agreement to face whatever came next with the same irreverent spirit that had gotten them this far. As they approached the makeshift settlement, Grix turned to Murren, his voice tinged with newfound confidence. Thanks for everything. I never realized how much I'd taken for granted until you showed me how to laugh again. Murren waved away the gratitude with a flick of his hand. Just doing my part to make the universe a slightly less miserable place. Besides, what's the point of saving the galaxy if you can't have a little fun along the way? Eco snorted. Just a little fun, huh? You must have a different definition of fun than most people. Their laughter echoed in the night, a sound that felt both defiant and joyful. It was a testament to their shared triumph, a victory not only for sarcasm but for the enduring spirit that refused to be silenced. As the settlement came into view,